Welcome! In this explainer, we are digging into the financial plan for Uganda's Kole District. We're going to follow the money to see exactly how 35 billion shillings will shape the lives of thousands of people over the next year.
So have you ever stopped to think about that? How does a whole district, with thousands of people, actually map out its future? How do they decide which roads get paved, which schools get funding, or how to keep the lights on at the health centers? It's a massive puzzle.
Well, it all comes down to one single document. Because a budget, it's so much more than just a spreadsheet full of numbers. It's the district's roadmap. It lays out every single priority for the year ahead. And really, it tells you the story of what that community cares about most. Okay, let's get right to the big number. For the upcoming fiscal year, the total approved budget for Kole District is over 35.3 billion Ugandan shillings. That is the entire pot of money the district has to work with for everything.
But here's where it gets interesting right off the bat. This year's budget is actually a little smaller than last year's. It's not a huge drop, but it immediately makes you ask, why is that? It could be any number of things, right? Maybe a little less funding from the central government, or maybe a big one-time project got finished last year.
So to really get a handle on this 35 billion shilling plan, we've got to follow the money trail. Let's kick things off with the first big question. Where is all this cash coming from?
And wow, this chart basically tells the entire story in one picture. The vast majority of the money, almost 30 billion shillings, comes directly from the central government. But what's really striking is that tiny little sliver down at the bottom. Only 470 million shillings, just over 1% of the entire budget, is actually raised right there in the district.
And this difference is absolutely critical. Those central government transfers are the main pipeline. But that word conditional is key. It means the money often comes with strings attached, for specific programs. The locally raised revenue, on the other hand, is the money the district has the most freedom with. But as we just saw, it's a very small piece of the pie, and that's a real challenge for local control.
Okay, so we know where the money's coming from. The next obvious question is, where is it all going? Let's flip the coin and look at the spending side of this budget.
This chart gives us a perfect snapshot of the district's priorities. And one thing just leaps off the screen: education. It's by far the biggest piece of the pie, taking up more than half of the entire budget. Then comes health. Together, these two areas really show you the core mission of the district.
And looking at the raw numbers here, it just confirms the story. These top 5 departments you see, they account for almost all of the spending. So when we talk about the real-world impact of this budget, these are the 5 areas where people are going to feel it the most.
All right, since education and health are the two absolute giants in this budget, let's zoom in a little bit. Let's see exactly how those billions and billions of shillings are being put to work.
First up, education. Just look at that number again, over 18 billion shillings. That is the single biggest investment Kole District is making, period. It's a really clear statement that its schools and its students are the #1 priority.
So where does all that 18 billion go? Well, the lion's share, over 14 billion, goes to paying teacher and staff salaries. The next big chunks are something called capitation grants. You can think of these as direct funding sent straight to schools to cover all their day-to-day running costs, everything from chalk and books to keeping the lights on. The rest covers other essentials like maintaining the buildings and running sports programs.
And this right here is how a huge abstract budget number becomes real for a community. Buried deep inside that 18 billion shilling plan is this specific line item, almost 91 million shillings set aside for construction and repairs at one particular school, Aburi Primary. This is the budget in action.
Okay, now let's pivot to the second biggest priority, health. The district has set aside over 6.1 billion shillings here. So let's see how that money is being used to keep the community healthy.
And the breakdown here is actually pretty similar to education. The biggest chunk pays the salaries for doctors, nurses, and all the health workers. Then you've got grants to keep the local health centers up and running. And a really critical piece comes from external partners, organizations like Gavi and UNICEF, who help fund specific programs like immunizations.
And here we go again, another concrete example. That 6.1 billion shilling health budget translates into practical, tangible things, like the 44 million shillings that are specifically earmarked to build a security fence at the Kole Health Center. It might seem like a small detail in a huge budget, but on the ground, that makes a real difference.
All right, for our last section, let's just look at a few more quick examples of how this budget goes from being numbers on a page to actual buildings, real equipment, and services that people use every single day.
So inside the administration budget, we find this major investment. A whopping 400 million shillings is being allocated to continue the construction on the Kaguta complex, which is the district's main administrative building.
Now, this one is pretty cool. 39 million shillings are set aside just to buy motorcycles. But these aren't for administrators, they're for agricultural extension workers. This is so they can actually get out to more remote farms and provide direct support to local farmers. It's a small but powerful investment in the local economy.
And, of course, you can't forget infrastructure. It's one of the most visible signs of a budget at work. Over 363 million shillings are dedicated to fixing the district's roads and bridges. I mean, that's the very network that connects the entire community.
You know, in the end, this quote really nails it. A budget tells a story. And by looking at where Kole District is putting its 35.3 billion shillings, we can see a very clear story about putting the education of its children and the health of its citizens first and foremost.
So what's the big takeaway here? A budget is just the plan. It's not the final result. The numbers are now set, the projects are all listed. The real question is what happens next. A year from now, how will the people of Kole District actually measure whether this plan, this story, was a true success? That's the question that really matters.